Sylvester Stallone, legendary actor and cultural icon, had quietly invested in a new high-end Italian-American fusion restaurant in Los Angeles, choosing to remain a silent partner while letting the brand rely on the allure of mystery and top-tier service. But on a quiet Thursday evening, unable to suppress his curiosity, he decided to visit the restaurant unannounced, donning a simple hoodie and baseball cap in an effort to blend in. As the valet took his keys, he noticed how sharply the exterior reflected the vision he had: clean, minimalist design with warm lights and marble accents. And already he felt a strange knot of pride tighten in his stomach. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with polite conversation, gentle jazz in the background, and a staff that seemed laser-focused on perfection. Yet Stallone kept his eyes on the margins: how the busboys moved, how the host smiled, and whether the waiters actually looked like they loved their jobs. He slipped into a quiet corner booth, hoping his sunglasses and casual dress would keep him unnoticed. But he couldn't help but observe the meticulous choreography of the servers weaving through the tables like dancers who'd memorized every inch of the stage. A young server named Kara approached his table with a practiced smile, asking if he'd been helped, and he responded with a gruff, "Not yet," which she met with a subtle nod and an easy grace that impressed him. Not overbearing, not rushed, just right. Stallone scanned the menu he had helped design, noting a few dishes were prepared differently than originally planned, but he let it slide, curious to see how they tasted. While he waited for the truffle gnocchi and veal scallopini he ordered, he noticed a small commotion at the bar. A couple complaining loudly about wine pairings, berating the bartender in passive-aggressive tones, and Stallone kept one ear on the exchange, watching how the staff handled the situation. To his surprise, the young bartender, maybe in his mid-20s, handled it with humility and calm, apologizing with elegance and offering a small comp for the trouble, an act that secretly warmed Stallone's heart. He liked people who knew how to take heat. Still, something didn't sit quite right with him. Beneath the polish, he sensed a tension among the waitstaff, overly tight smiles, glances passed like Morse code, and an energy that hinted at something fraying under the surface. His food arrived, perfectly plated, and he took slow bites, genuinely enjoying the textures and flavors. But he kept scanning the floor, the kind of man who couldn't help but analyze a room, always alert. Near the end of his meal, Kara returned to refill his water, and he looked at her again, this time more closely, and noticed her eyes were faintly puffy, her makeup layered just thick enough to suggest something was being hidden. "Long shift?" he asked casually, not expecting more than a polite yes, but she offered only a tight smile and nodded before quickly retreating. Moments later, she disappeared from the floor, and another server quietly took over her section, explaining to his table that Kara had stepped away for a break. Stallone didn't buy it. Not with that look in her eyes, not with the strange shift in the air the moment she left. As he finished his meal, he thanked the server, left a generous tip under a fake name, and slipped out of the main dining area, walking slowly toward the hallway that led to the kitchen and staff areas, claiming to be looking for the restroom. No one stopped him. His body language, his confidence, and the faint shadow of recognition on one busboy's face gave him invisible clearance. As he passed the swinging kitchen doors, he caught the sharp scent of garlic and oil, laughter from the cooks, and the clatter of pots, but a low sound tugged at him, a muffled sob coming from the back hallway near the lockers. He hesitated, pulse quickening, suddenly unsure of how far he wanted to take this little undercover mission, but something, maybe instinct, maybe guilt, pushed him forward. Turning the corner, he saw Kara seated on a bench by the staff lockers, her head in her hands, shoulders trembling, trying to muffle her sobs with the sleeve of her black uniform. She didn't see him at first, and for a moment he just stood there, frozen, not because of fear, but because the rawness of the moment pierced through the air like glass breaking in a quiet room. It was the kind of cry that didn't come from spilled drinks or rude customers. It came from deeper wells. "You all right?" he finally asked, his voice low, still trying to keep his identity hidden, but she flinched anyway, startled and embarrassed, wiping her face and shaking her head. "Sorry, I didn't mean. I just need a minute," she stammered, clearly mortified that someone had seen her. Stallone slowly took a seat on the bench across from her, unsure of what to say next, but something about her vulnerability cracked something open in him, and he said softly, "You don't have to explain it all. Just breathe." She looked at him again, eyes locking briefly, and something about his voice, maybe the cadence or the gravel, made her squint, as if trying to recognize a memory she couldn't quite place. He didn't tell her who he was. Not yet. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket, handed her a clean napkin, and sat with her in the quiet for a few moments longer, the silence heavier than most conversations. And in that small hidden hallway, under fluorescent lights and surrounded by the quiet hum of kitchen machinery, Stallone realized this was more than a simple visit. Something bigger was unfolding, something that would soon reveal the hidden cracks beneath the restaurant's polished surface. As Sylvester Stallone sat silently in that dim hallway, watching Kara slowly collect herself, he couldn't shake the growing sense that something was seriously wrong behind the gleam of the restaurant's success. And though he had intended his visit to be just a quiet, undercover inspection, something about Kara's breakdown pulled him deeper into the reality his investment had helped build. She tried to speak, once, twice, but faltered, embarrassed, cheeks flushed, until finally she blurted, "I'm sorry, I can't take much more of this place." And Stallone, keeping his voice soft, simply asked, "What's going on?" That question unlocked something, and once the first words came out, the rest followed like a dam breaking. She spoke in a near whisper about the long hours, the impossible shift demands, the cliques formed by certain senior staff, and most of all, the floor manager named Rick, who had slowly turned the restaurant into his personal fiefdom. "He's not just strict," she said, staring at the floor. "He's cruel, vindictive. He screams at people in the walk-in freezer so customers won't hear." Stallone's jaw clenched. He'd seen men like that before, bullies in business suits who abused their sliver of power because no one had stopped them early enough. Kara explained how Rick made her and others clock out early but stay later to clean, how he'd dock tips for attitude, and worst of all, how he'd once cornered her in the break room and made a comment about how she'd keep her job as long as she smiled pretty. That last part made Stallone's stomach twist, not just because of the vulgarity of it, but because it was happening in his name, under his investment, and with his silence. He asked how long this had been going on, and she told him months, and that others had tried to report Rick, but the complaints vanished or got lost. Suddenly, he remembered the email summary from the management team weeks earlier, praising Rick's strong leadership and staff control. Control. That was the word they used. As Kara wiped her eyes and apologized again, Stallone assured her gently, "You don't need to be sorry for telling the truth," and stood up, his mind already spinning with decisions. He asked her to return to the floor when she was ready, and she nodded hesitantly, still unaware who he really was, though some suspicion lingered in her eyes. Stallone made his way toward the back office with the quiet focus of a man preparing for a fight, and when he pushed open the door marked "Manager," he found Rick inside, mid-conversation with someone on a Bluetooth headset, laughing about how these Gen Z kids can't take a little pressure. Rick didn't recognize Stallone at first, just glanced up with a dismissive, "Staff area only, buddy," until the older man stepped forward, removed his hoodie, and stared him down with a look that silenced the room. "Take the headset off," Stallone said, voice low and even. Rick blinked twice, mouth parting, face paling. "Wait, Mr. Stallone." The words came out strangled. "That's right," Stallone said, folding his arms. "We need to talk." What followed was not a screaming match or a dramatic punch. Stallone didn't need theatrics. What he delivered was worse for a man like Rick, calm, focused rage. He asked for explanations about the false clockouts, the walk-in shouting, the HR complaints that mysteriously disappeared, and Rick tried to deny, deflect, even laugh, until Stallone said the phrase that shut him up completely. "Kara told me everything." Rick's face shifted then, guilt morphing into fear. "You don't understand. These kids are lazy, they lie, they twist things. I understand exactly," Stallone interrupted. "You think running a place means breaking people down. That's not leadership. That's cowardice." Rick tried to stand, to reassert authority, but Stallone stepped forward, eyes dark and unblinking. "You're done here. Effective immediately." Rick's mouth opened again, some desperate attempt at defense forming, But it didn't matter. Stallone had already dialed the regional HR director on speakerphone and delivered a concise summary of what he'd witnessed, instructing them to initiate a full investigation and prepare severance under misconduct termination. As Rick slumped in his chair, Stallone stepped back into the hallway, took a deep breath, and tried to shake off the rage burning in his chest. He hadn't felt that old fire in years, the protective instinct that once made him a champion of the underdog, both on-screen and off. In the kitchen, some staff noticed him now, his face no longer hidden, and words spread fast. Heads turned, whispers stirred, eyes widened in disbelief. Stallone approached the kitchen line where the head chef, a no-nonsense woman named Morella, stood frozen with a ladle in hand, and he nodded to her. "I need your help," he said simply. "We're going to clean this place from the inside out." Morella, who had worked with Rick for months and hated every second of it, simply replied, "Whatever you need, boss." With her help, Stallone gathered the floor staff after closing and asked them to stay a few extra minutes, not for punishment, but for a conversation. Standing in the softly lit dining room, no longer undercover, he addressed them all directly, from the dishwashers to the bartenders. "This place was meant to be more than profit," he said. "It was meant to be something good. But I failed you by not looking closer." There was silence at first, disbelief still rippling through the room. But then someone clapped, and then another. And soon, reluctant hope filled the air, fragile but growing. Stallone promised open lines to HR, promised bonuses for those affected by Rick's abusive policies, and most of all, promised that this place would no longer be a trap but a sanctuary, a workplace, not a war zone. Kara stood near the back, eyes glassy but proud. She smiled, not the fake service smile, but something real, grateful. As the staff slowly dispersed, whispering with renewed energy, Stallone stood alone in the middle of his own dream, no longer hollowed out by someone else's rot. This restaurant had been beautiful on the outside, but now it had a chance to be something rare, honest on the inside too. The morning sun over Los Angeles looked no different than the day before. But to Stallone, everything had changed. His mind was a whirlpool of regret, resolve, and awakening. And as he stood on his balcony overlooking the hills, he kept replaying Kara's broken voice in the back hallway, the cold truth of Rick's dominance, and the disillusioned stares of employees who once believed in the myth of his name. He had spent decades building an image, the underdog who never quit, the fighter who punched through adversity. And yet, in a quiet corner of his own legacy, people had been hurting under the shadow of that image while he looked away, not from malice, but from the same distance that allows rot to thrive under polished floors. That morning, he didn't go to the gym. He didn't return calls. He sat at his desk, opened a blank notepad, and started writing. Not lines for a character, but something raw, a letter to his staff, to the public, to himself. The letter grew into a statement, and the statement into a call. Not for sympathy, but for accountability, because he knew if he didn't use his platform to expose this fully and publicly, the damage would simply repackage itself and continue. Within hours, his publicist was on the line, panicked by the scale of what he was planning. A live press address from the sidewalk outside the restaurant, with the full staff invited to stand behind him and no PR filter between him and the world. "You don't need to go this big," she said. "A statement will do." But Stallone interrupted, voice sharp with finality. "That's how we got here. Too many statements, not enough truth." Word spread like wildfire. By afternoon, national media outlets had RSVP'd, camera trucks began parking across the street, and online speculation exploded. People expected scandal, meltdown, maybe even a lawsuit, but what they got was something entirely different. When Stallone stepped to the microphone under the clear blue sky, dressed in an unbranded black tee and jeans, he didn't open with apology. He opened with an admission. "I let this happen." Reporters froze mid-scribble. "I stamped my name on a place I didn't fully understand. I trusted people to do right by others, and I failed. Not just as an investor, but as a human being." He paused, eyes scanning the crowd, locking briefly with Kara's, who stood off to the side in a white button-up, arms crossed, face unreadable. "But I'm not here to hide. I'm here to rebuild, and not just this restaurant, but everything it should stand for. Then, Stallone laid out the reality in unflinching terms. The mistreatment of staff, the manipulation of hours, the emotional abuse veiled as tough management, and the quiet ways everyday people are crushed in industries built to smile for the public and grind behind closed doors. He called Rick out by name, not to humiliate, but to ensure no one forgot who had made choices to harm others. But more importantly, he called himself out. My silence gave room for this. My absence became permission. Then came the promises, not PR fluff, but structural, enforceable change. A permanent third-party HR partner with full access to staff, profit sharing for all employees, leadership roles open to those with real integrity regardless of tenure or charm, and a company-wide labor equity pledge tied to wage transparency. But that wasn't the headline. The headline came when he turned to his staff and invited them, live, to speak. One by one, hesitant but emboldened, employees came forward. Kara told her story with quiet fire, no longer trembling. Juan, the line cook, explained how Rick humiliated him after a family emergency. Alina shared how her ideas were stolen and credited to louder voices. Even Morella, the stone-faced head chef, revealed she'd considered quitting last winter because she couldn't protect her people from the culture above. The crowd didn't gasp. They listened, really listened. And in those moments, something broke open beyond the cameras. The internet lit up within hours, not with mockery, but admiration. Hashtags like hashtag Stallone Standard, hashtag Restaurants Deserve Better, and hashtag Silence is Consent began trending. Think pieces exploded across the web. The celebrity who finally did the right thing. Stallone's greatest role is this one, from Rocky to real. Activists and union organizers contacted Kara directly. Several major restaurant chains quietly initiated internal reviews. But this wasn't just a cultural moment. It became a personal mission. Over the following months, Stallone returned weekly, sometimes publicly, sometimes quietly. He didn't just shake hands or pose for photos. He shadowed hosts. He cleaned tables. He sat in on staff meetings. When the dishwasher's son was hospitalized, Stallone covered the bills quietly. When a server broke down from burnout mid-shift, he sat with her in the alley and listened. The staff didn't idolize him. They trusted him because he earned it. He started a fund to help food industry workers access therapy, addiction recovery, and family leave, calling it the Backbone Fund. He set up a nonprofit to help whistleblowers safely speak out. More importantly, he gave equity to Kara and Morella, making them co-owners, not honorary, but legal. You're the ones keeping this place alive, he told them. You should own it. Kara tried to decline, afraid of the attention, but Stallone insisted. Courage like yours? That builds empires. The restaurant itself transformed, not in decor, but in feel. The front of house buzzed with energy that wasn't forced. The kitchen hummed with pride. Customers came not just for food, but for the story, for what the place represented. Other celebrities called, asking how to replicate the model. One investor offered to franchise it nationwide. Stallone said no. If we go bigger, we do it right, he said. Integrity or nothing. One night, nearly a year after that press conference, Stallone returned late after hours. The lights were dimmed. The smell of bread still lingered in the air. He sat in a corner booth and just listened, to the laughter echoing from the back, to the playlist one server always ran after close, to the quiet hum of a place that no longer hid wounds under polish. Morella joined him, sliding into the booth across. You did good, she said. No, Stallone replied after a pause. We did right. He pulled out his phone and opened a draft of a speech he'd been invited to give at a labor rights gala the following month. A speech he didn't know how to end. Morella looked at him, then said, Tell them the truth. That you showed up thinking you were the hero and left knowing you were just another part of the crew. Stallone smiled. For the first time in decades, the applause in his head faded, and peace took its place.